My alarm didn't go off and I missed the school bus. An hour later, my daughter texted, terrified. "Dad, we crashed." I typed back, "Are you okay?" She replied, "The driver just—" The text ended there, 3 dots that felt like they went on forever, and I stared at my phone screen in the middle of my kitchen at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning while my coffee went cold in my hand. My daughter Lily was 12 years old, 6th grade, the kind of kid who texted in complete sentences with proper punctuation even when she was excited. She didn't leave messages unfinished. I called her immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, her cheerful recorded voice saying she'd call back soon. I called again. Same result. My hands started shaking badly enough that I nearly dropped the phone. I pulled up the school district's transportation tracker app, the one that was supposed to show real-time GPS locations of all school buses. Bus 43, Lily's route, showed its last update at 8:31 a.m. on Riverside Drive, about 3 miles from the middle school. No movement since then. The status just said, "delayed" in yellow text, nothing about an accident or emergency. I grabbed my keys and ran for my car, already calling 911 as I backed out of the driveway. The dispatcher asked what my emergency was, and I explained my daughter had texted that her school bus crashed, but I didn't know where or how bad it was. She put me on hold to check with emergency services, came back 30 seconds later with information that made my chest tighten. "Sir, we do have units responding to a traffic incident on Riverside Drive involving a school bus. I can't provide details about injuries over the phone, but I'd recommend heading to Mercy General Hospital. That's where they're transporting students." I'd been a single father for 4 years, ever since my wife Rebecca died from complications during what was supposed to be a routine surgery to remove her appendix. Lily had been 8 when we lost her mom, and those first 2 years were just survival mode, both of us learning how to exist in a world that felt fundamentally broken. I worked as a network engineer for a tech company downtown, flexible hours and good benefits that let me be present for school pickups and soccer games and the million small moments that make up raising a kid alone. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Portland where people knew their neighbors and school bus routes hadn't changed in 20 years. I trusted the system, trusted that sending Lily to school on a big yellow bus with an experienced driver was safe and normal. The driver for Route 43 was a man named Gerald Hutchins, late 50s, who'd been driving for the district for 16 years, according to the parent information sheet they sent home at the beginning of each school year. He seemed fine the few times I'd met him, waving at parents during morning pickup, always on time. Nothing that would suggest any concerns. I drove to Mercy General doing 80 in a 65 zone, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The hospital parking lot was chaos when I arrived at 9:14 a.m., news vans already setting up, parents running toward the emergency entrance. I parked illegally and sprinted inside, gave Lily's name to the woman at the registration desk. She checked her computer and told me Lily was in the pediatric emergency department, that a nurse would come get me. I stood there in the waiting area with maybe 15 other parents, all of us wearing the same expression of barely controlled panic. A woman next to me was crying quietly into her phone. A man in a suit was demanding answers from hospital staff who clearly didn't have them yet. 23 minutes later, a nurse finally came out and called my name. I followed her through double doors into the pediatric ER, a chaotic space filled with kids on gurneys and medical staff moving with practiced urgency. She brought me to a curtained area where Lily sat on an exam table, her left arm in a temporary splint and a bandage on her forehead, but conscious and alert. I grabbed her into a hug that made her wince. "Dad, my arm," she said, and I loosened my grip but didn't let go. "What happened? Are you okay? What hurts?" Lily's voice was shaky but coherent. "My arm is broken," they said, "and I hit my head but I don't have a concussion." "Dad, it was so scary. We were just driving normal, and then Mr. Hutchins just stopped responding. Some of the kids were yelling at him but he didn't answer, and then we went off the road and hit a tree." I pulled back to look at her face, checking for signs of shock or confusion. "What do you mean he stopped responding? Like he had a medical emergency?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know. He was just staring straight ahead and not saying anything. His hands were on the wheel, but he wasn't driving right, like he was there but not there. It was weird. Then everything happened really fast." A doctor came in before I could ask more questions, a young woman in her early 30s who introduced herself as Dr. Nina Alvarez, pediatric emergency medicine. She explained Lily's injuries: closed fracture of the left radius, minor laceration on her forehead that had been cleaned and bandaged, no signs of concussion, but they wanted to monitor her for a few hours. She'd need a cast on her arm but should heal fine. I asked about the other students. Dr. Alvarez's expression got careful. "We're treating 14 children from the accident. Most have minor injuries like Lily's. 3 are more seriously injured and are being evaluated by trauma surgeons, but I can't discuss other patients due to privacy regulations." I spent the next 3 hours in the hospital while they set Lily's arm in a bright purple cast and monitored her for any delayed symptoms. During that time, I learned more about the accident from other parents and from news reports on the waiting room TV. Bus 43 had veered off Riverside Drive at approximately 8:34 a.m., crossed into the opposite lane, and collided with a tree at around 35 miles per hour. 18 students had been on board. No fatalities, which felt like a miracle, but 3 kids were in critical condition with serious head injuries and internal trauma. The driver, Gerald Hutchins, had been taken to a different hospital and was reportedly unconscious. The school district had released a statement expressing concern for all students involved and promising a full investigation. They were vague on details, just standard corporate crisis management language that said nothing while sounding sympathetic. By the time I brought Lily home at 2:30 p.m., my phone was flooded with messages from other parents, from Lily's school, from my boss asking if I needed time off, from the school district's automated notification system with updates. I got Lily settled on the couch with her arm elevated and pain medication the hospital had sent us home with, then started going through messages systematically. One stood out, a text from an unknown number at 11:23 a.m. that said, "This is Cheryl Granger, mother of Sophie Granger who was on bus 43. We should talk. Gerald Hutchins has a history. The district knows. Call me." I called the number immediately. Cheryl Granger answered on the second ring, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. She explained her daughter Sophie was one of the kids with serious injuries, currently in pediatric ICU with a traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding. Cheryl was at the hospital but had been asking questions, demanding answers from hospital staff and school district representatives. What she'd learned was disturbing. Gerald Hutchins had apparently been involved in a previous accident 3 years ago, another school bus incident where he'd driven off the road and collided with a mailbox. That accident had been minor, no serious injuries, and had been attributed to him swerving to avoid a deer. But Cheryl had found out through another parent whose husband worked for the district that there had been concerns about Hutchins falling asleep at the wheel. Nothing official, just rumors, but enough that some parents had requested their kids be moved to different routes. The district had conducted an internal review and cleared Hutchins to continue driving. "Did you know any of this?" Cheryl asked, and I could hear the accusation in her tone, like I should have known, should have protected my kid better. "No," I said honestly. "I had no idea. The district never told us there were any concerns about the driver." Cheryl told me she was planning to file a lawsuit against the district and was gathering information from other parents. She'd already contacted a personal injury attorney named Stuart Blackwood, 22 years specializing in school district liability cases. He was taking her case and wanted to talk to other parents who might be interested in joining a class action. She gave me his number and told me to call if I wanted to hold the district accountable. After we hung up, I sat there processing what I'd learned. If the district knew Hutchins had issues and kept him driving anyway, that was negligence. Criminal negligence if Sophie and the other seriously injured kids didn't recover. But I also knew how these things worked. The district would have lawyers, insurance companies, resources to fight back. They'd claim they'd followed proper procedures, that the previous accident was truly just a deer in the road, that there was no way to predict today's crash. They'd settle quietly if they had to, pay out some money, admit no wrongdoing, and move on, unless someone pushed hard enough to force real accountability. I called Stuart Blackwood the next morning. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon at his office in downtown Portland. Stuart turned out to be a man in his late 50s with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested he didn't miss details. His office was professional but not flashy, walls covered with framed certificates and photos of him with various clients. He listened while I explained what happened to Lily and what Cheryl had told me about Hutchins' history. "Here's what I've learned so far," Stuart said, pulling out a file folder. "Gerald Hutchins has been a school bus driver for 16 years with this district. Clean driving record with the DMV, no DUIs, no major violations. But he's had 3 previous incidents while driving for the district. The first was 11 years ago, a minor fender bender in the bus yard that was attributed to driver error. The second was 3 years ago, the one where he went off the road and hit a mailbox, attributed to avoiding wildlife. The third was 18 months ago, when he reportedly dozed off at a stop sign and had to be woken up by students. That third incident was documented in an internal report, but wasn't reported to the State Transportation Authority as required by law." I felt my stomach drop. "They covered it up?" "Not exactly. They conducted a review, sent Hutchins for a medical evaluation that cleared him, and decided it was an isolated incident that didn't warrant reporting. But by law, when a commercial driver shows signs of impairment or inability to safely operate a vehicle, the employer is required to report it and potentially suspend their commercial license. The district chose not to do that." Stuart pulled out more documents, incident reports with names redacted, internal memos discussing the various accidents. "I'm filing a negligence lawsuit on behalf of Cheryl Granger and her daughter. I'd like to include your daughter and any other families who want to participate. But I need you to understand what you're getting into. The district will fight hard. They'll try to claim this was an unforeseeable medical emergency, that Hutchins had a stroke or heart attack or some acute condition that couldn't have been predicted. They'll present their internal reviews as evidence they took safety seriously. They'll drag this out for years if they can." "What do you think actually happened?" I asked. Stuart's expression got grim. "Based on witness statements I've collected from students, Hutchins appeared to be in some kind of altered state before the crash. Not responsive, staring ahead, not reacting to kids yelling at him. That's consistent with either a medical event or with being under the influence of something. The toxicology report will tell us more, but those results take weeks. In the meantime, I'm investigating Hutchins' background, his medical history, his prescription medications, anything that might explain what happened." I signed the retainer agreement right there, authorizing Stuart to represent Lily in a lawsuit against the school district. He said he'd be filing initial paperwork within the week and would keep me updated on developments. I left his office feeling like I'd done something concrete, taken a step toward accountability, but also feeling the weight of what was coming. This would be a long fight, probably years, with no guarantee of justice. Over the next 2 weeks, more information emerged in pieces. The toxicology report on Gerald Hutchins came back showing significant levels of prescription painkillers in his system, specifically oxycodone at concentrations consistent with recent use. Hutchins had a valid prescription for the medication, prescribed 6 months ago by his doctor for chronic back pain. But the prescription bottle had a clear warning label stating the medication could cause drowsiness, and patients should not operate vehicles or heavy machinery while taking it. The district claimed they had no knowledge Hutchins was taking prescription painkillers. Their driver handbook required employees to disclose any medications that might impair their ability to drive safely, but Hutchins had never reported the prescription. I attended a school board meeting 3 weeks after the accident, one that was packed with parents demanding answers. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the room looking uncomfortable, while parent after parent stood at the microphone and spoke about their children's injuries, their medical bills, their lost trust in the district's ability to keep kids safe. The superintendent, a man named Dr. Raymond Foster with 30 years in education administration, gave a prepared statement expressing sympathy and outlining the district's cooperation with ongoing investigations. He claimed the district had followed all proper procedures in hiring and monitoring Hutchins, that the previous incidents had been properly investigated and resolved, that there was no way to predict the medication issue. A parent stood up and called him a liar. Security had to escort her out when she refused to sit down. The meeting devolved into shouting and chaos before being called to a recess. I left feeling angry and helpless, watching a system protect itself while children suffered the consequences. Stewart filed the class action lawsuit 6 weeks after the accident, representing 14 families whose children had been injured. The district's response came 2 weeks later, a motion to dismiss claiming governmental immunity and arguing the district had no legal duty to monitor employees' prescription medications. Stewart filed a counter-motion with extensive documentation of the district's pattern of ignoring safety concerns. The legal battle became technical and slow, exactly as Stewart had warned. Meanwhile, Sophie Granger remained in the hospital for 3 months, recovering from her brain injury through extensive rehabilitation. She'd lost some motor function on her left side and had cognitive issues that would require years of therapy. 2 other seriously injured students had similar long-term impacts. Lily healed faster, her arm out of the cast after 6 weeks, but she refused to ride a school bus anymore. I started driving her to school myself, adding 40 minutes to my commute each way, but I couldn't force her back onto a bus. She'd wake up with nightmares sometimes, reliving the crash, asking why Mr. Hutchins didn't stop the bus when kids were screaming. I didn't have good answers. 6 months after the accident, Stewart called with news. He'd obtained documents through discovery that showed the school district had conducted an internal investigation after the 18-month-ago incident where Hutchins had fallen asleep at a stop sign. That investigation had recommended Hutchins be suspended from driving pending a comprehensive medical evaluation. But the district's transportation director, a man named Kenneth Voss, had overruled the recommendation, citing Hutchins's long service record and a note from Hutchins's doctor clearing him to drive. The document trail showed Voss had been under pressure to avoid driver shortages, which were already creating scheduling problems for bus routes. He'd made a calculated decision to keep Hutchins driving, despite the safety concerns. Stewart also discovered that 3 parents had filed formal complaints with the district over the past 2 years about Hutchins's driving, claiming he seemed drowsy or inattentive on certain routes. The district's response had been to send Hutchins for additional training and to monitor his routes more closely, but they hadn't removed him from driving or reported the complaints to state authorities as required. "This is negligence," Stewart said during our meeting in his office. "Clear, documented negligence. The district knew Hutchins was a risk and chose to ignore it because removing him would create staffing problems. They put convenience over children's safety, and now we can prove it." The lawsuit moved forward with this new evidence. The district's lawyers fought back hard, arguing that the internal documents were protected by attorney-client privilege and shouldn't be admissible. Stewart filed motions to compel disclosure, citing public interest and the need for accountability. The judge sided with us, ordering the district to turn over all documents related to Hutchins's employment and any safety investigations. What emerged was damning. Hutchins had been taking oxycodone for chronic pain for over 2 years, not 6 months, as initially reported. He'd been prescribed increasing doses over time as his tolerance built up. His doctor had warned him repeatedly not to drive while taking the medication, documented in medical records that the district never requested or reviewed. The previous accidents, including the one attributed to avoiding a deer, all occurred during periods when Hutchins's prescription dosages had been increased. The pattern was clear to anyone looking, but the district hadn't looked, or had chosen not to see. The case gained media attention when a local investigative journalist named Patricia Lee started covering it for the Oregonian. She'd lost a nephew in a different school bus accident years ago and was passionate about transportation safety. Her articles detailed the district's failures, the pattern of ignored warnings, the children still dealing with injuries 9 months after the crash. Public pressure mounted. Parents demanded the school board fire Dr. Foster and Kenneth Voss. Students organized walkouts demanding better safety protocols. The teachers' union issued a statement condemning the district's handling of driver oversight. Under pressure, the school board voted to place Dr. Foster on administrative leave and accept Kenneth Voss's resignation. They hired an outside consulting firm to review all transportation safety procedures and recommend changes. The moves felt performative, too little too late, but they were something. The trial was scheduled for 18 months after the accident. Stewart had assembled an overwhelming case. The internal documents showing the district knew about Hutchins's issues, the toxicology report showing he was impaired while driving, the medical records proving his doctor had told him not to drive, the pattern of ignored parent complaints. The district's lawyers tried to settle, offering a total of $2.3 million to be split among the 14 families. Stewart advised us to reject it. "They're trying to buy silence," he explained during a meeting with all the plaintiff families. "That settlement amount is insulting given the injuries, the medical costs, and the lifetime impacts on children like Sophie. We can do better at trial." We voted unanimously to reject the settlement and proceed to trial. The district came back with an improved offer, $4.8 million. Stewart said it was still too low. We rejected that one too. The trial began on a Monday morning in County Superior Court, Judge Elizabeth Navarro presiding, 26 years on the bench with a reputation for being tough, but fair. The courtroom was packed with parents, media, and curious observers. The district's legal team was led by Dennis Fairchild, a partner at one of Portland's largest firms, specializing in defending governmental entities. He was good at his job, presenting the district as a well-meaning institution that had followed reasonable procedures, but couldn't have predicted a perfect storm of circumstances. Stewart dismantled that narrative piece by piece. He called witnesses who testified about the previous incidents and the district's minimal responses. He presented the internal documents showing Kenneth Voss had overruled safety recommendations. He brought in medical experts who explained how oxycodone impairs reaction time and judgment, how Hutchins should never have been driving while taking therapeutic doses, much less the higher doses shown in his toxicology report. He called parents who'd filed complaints that were ignored. He showed surveillance footage from the bus on the day of the crash, recovered from the onboard camera system, showing Hutchins staring blankly ahead while students screamed at him to stop. The most powerful testimony came from Sophie Granger herself. At 13 now, she walked to the witness stand with a noticeable limp, her left arm hanging stiffly at her side. She spoke clearly about her memories of the crash, about the fear she felt when the bus driver didn't respond, about waking up in the hospital not knowing where she was or what had happened. She described the months of physical therapy, the cognitive exercises to relearn basic skills, the frustration of not being able to do things that used to be easy. She cried when Stewart asked her what she wanted people to know. "I just want other kids to be safe," she said. "I don't want this to happen to anyone else." The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. They returned a verdict finding the school district liable for negligence and awarding $23.7 million in damages to the plaintiff families. The breakdown was $8.2 million for Sophie's family, given the severity of her ongoing injuries, with the remaining $15.5 million distributed among the other 13 families based on injury severity and long-term impacts. Lily's share was $890,000, far more than I'd expected. The courtroom erupted in applause when the verdict was read. Several parents were crying. I felt a complicated mix of vindication and exhaustion, glad we'd won, but knowing it didn't undo what happened to these kids. The school district's insurance covered most of the judgment, though the district would face increased premiums for years. Dr. Foster was officially fired by the school board 1 week after the verdict. Kenneth Voss faced criminal charges for official misconduct and reckless endangerment, filed by the county prosecutor who'd been watching the trial. He pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years probation, plus a $10,000 fine. Gerald Hutchins, who'd spent months in a coma after the accident due to head trauma from the crash, eventually recovered enough to be charged with 14 counts of reckless endangerment. His lawyer argued he was a victim of his pain medication's side effects and didn't knowingly drive impaired. The prosecutor countered that he'd been explicitly warned not to drive while taking the medication and chose to ignore those warnings for months. Hutchins pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a sentence of 5 years probation and permanent revocation of his commercial driver's license. He'd never drive professionally again. The school district implemented sweeping changes to their transportation safety protocols. All bus drivers now had to undergo quarterly medical evaluations and disclose any prescription medications. Random drug testing was instituted. A new safety committee with parent representatives was formed to review driver performance and investigate complaints. The changes felt adequate but came at the cost of children's suffering, reactive rather than proactive, typical of institutional failure. Lily used her settlement money to establish a college fund and donated $50,000 to a nonprofit that advocated for school bus safety regulations. She was 14 now and had mostly moved past the trauma, though she still insisted on me driving her to school. She'd become an advocate for student safety, speaking at school board meetings about the importance of listening when students raise concerns. I was proud of who she was becoming, even though I wished she'd never had to learn these lessons. Sophie Granger made a remarkable recovery over 3 years, regaining most of her motor function through intensive therapy. She still had some cognitive challenges and would likely deal with long-term effects, but she was back in school, making friends, living a life that had seemed impossible right after the crash. Her mother, Cheryl, became a vocal advocate for changing state laws around school transportation safety, testifying at the legislature and pushing for mandatory reporting requirements when bus drivers showed signs of impairment. Several of her proposed changes were enacted into law. Patricia Lee won a regional journalism award for her coverage of the case. Her articles had exposed the systemic failures that allowed the crash to happen and had helped generate public pressure that led to meaningful reforms. She continued covering education and safety issues, using Sophie's story as an example of why investigative journalism mattered. 4 years after the accident, I attended a school board meeting where they dedicated a new safety protocol manual in honor of the students injured on Bus 43. The manual outlined comprehensive procedures for driver monitoring, complaint investigation, and medical disclosure requirements. It wasn't perfect, but it was real progress. Policies that might prevent another Gerald Hutchins from driving impaired children around for years. I thought about the morning my alarm didn't go off, the random chance that kept me from getting Lily to the bus stop on time. If I'd woken up on schedule, if Lily had caught that bus, I would have been just another parent watching their kid get on a vehicle driven by a man impaired by prescription painkillers. I wouldn't have known to worry, wouldn't have known the district had ignored warning signs for years. The accident would have happened whether or not Lily was on board, but missing the bus meant I learned about the crash through her text, meant I became involved immediately, meant I was positioned to fight for accountability. Sometimes randomness saves you. Sometimes it just changes how you experience the trauma. Lily and I still talked about that day sometimes, usually when she had nightmares or when something triggered the memory. I'd ask her what helped, what made her feel safe. She always said the same thing, knowing that we'd fought back, that we hadn't just accepted what happened, that the district faced consequences, and other kids would be safer because of it. That mattered more than the money, more than the guilty verdicts, more than any of the measurable outcomes. We'd turned pain into purpose. That was enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.